May God bless your day today, and may his grace and peace be with you throughout this entire week ahead.
Absolute.
We are sending that blessing your way as you join us for this deep dive. Because today, well, we're looking at a divine recipe that does something entirely counterintuitive.
Oh, for sure.
We're looking at a spiritual cure that actually infects the doctors who make it. You are about to explore one of the most enigmatic, mysterious, and honestly deeply paradoxical rituals from the ancient world.
Yeah, tucked away right there in Numbers chapter 19.
Exactly. And relying heavily on the historical and theological study notes from both the Holman and N. study Bibles, we are going to understand the ancient recipe for the ashes of the red heifer and the resulting water of separation.
Okay.
Let's unpack this. How can a recipe designed to make unclean people clean simultaneously make clean people unclean?
It really is one of the most singular texts in ancient Near Eastern literature. I mean, usually when you study the rituals in antiquity, especially regarding community health and spiritual purity, you expect a certain, straightforward logic.
Right, like a transaction.
Yeah, exactly. A clean person does something to an unclean person, and the unclean person gets better. But this specific chapter in Numbers deliberately breaks those patterns. It introduces this circular dilemma that has puzzled scholars and theologians for centuries.
The core tension here, the hook that makes this so fascinating for you listening, is the fact that God gives a very specific instruction designed to take people who are severely unclean and make them clean.
Right.
But in the very process of manufacturing this purifying agent, the people who are already clean become contaminated themselves. I mean, it is a cleansing agent that defiles its makers.
To really get to the bottom of that paradox, we have to start with the raw materials. Because before we can understand what this water of purification actually fixes, we have to look closely at how it is made.
And the ingredients are wild.
They really are. They aren't just random elements pulled from the desert. They are incredibly specific and loaded with a heavy, deliberate symbolism.
Yeah, so the text in Numbers begins with God giving a command to Moses and Aaron. They have to have the Israelites bring them a red heifer. And God specifies a heifer, a young female cow that has never been put to work.
Right, never worn a yoke.
Never worn a yoke and is completely flawless without a single physical blemish.
So once they acquire this highly specific animal, the ritual begins by intentionally moving away from the center of the community. Eleazar the priest takes this red heifer completely outside the camp.
Outside the camp?
Yeah, and this is a crucial detail. This event is not happening on the main bronze altar in the center of the tabernacle courtyard where, standard sacrifices occur. It's happening out in the margins.
Out in the wilderness.
Exactly. The heifer is slaughtered there, and Eleazar takes some of its blood on his finger and sprinkles it 7 times toward the front of the tent of meeting.
It's such a striking visual, standing way outside the boundaries of the camp, flicking this blood back toward the spiritual epicenter of the community.
Yeah, it really is.
But the next step is what feels so extreme to me. The text dictates that the entire heifer is burned right there in Eleazar's sight. And that means everything.
Everything.
The hide, the flesh, the blood, and even the dung. It is a total, unmitigated combustion of the animal.
And while it's burning, the priest actively adds 3 very specific elements to the fire. He throws in cedar wood, hyssop, which the Holman study notes suggest might actually be a plant similar to marjoram, like a fragrant type of sage, and a piece of scarlet yarn.
Wait, yarn?
Yeah, scarlet yarn. All of this goes straight into the roaring fire to become part of the resulting ash.
So you're essentially combining these highly symbolic items into this massive pile of super ash. It's like an ancient, highly concentrated recipe for some kind of spiritual bleach.
What's fascinating here is the layered symbolism detailed in the NAA study notes. Every single element speaks to the stark contrast between life and death. Well, the heifer has to be young and never yoked, because its youth and unworked state represent the absolute plenitude of life. It possesses a vitality that hasn't been worn down by the labor of the world,
Okay, that makes sense.
And the color red, along with that scarlet yarn thrown into the fire, vividly suggests blood. In the biblical worldview, blood is the ultimate agent of expiation.
Meaning the mechanism for making amends and purifying?
Exactly.
So you are taking the ultimate symbols of vital, pulsating life and intentionally reducing them to ash.
And there's a strong somatic link here to another extreme form of purification. The cedar wood, the hyssop, and the scarlet yarn. Those are the exact same 3 ingredients used in the purification rituals for lepers.
Oh, wow. Back in Leviticus 14, right?
Yep. Leprosy, in the ancient Near Eastern mindset, was treated as akin to a living death. It was a physical deterioration that mirrored the decomposition of a corpse. So these specific ingredients are deployed only when dealing with the most severe, profound types of uncleanness.
Let's pause on the mechanics of this, though, because I really have to push back on the sheer economics of the ritual.
Okay, lay it on me.
From a practical standpoint, this just seems incredibly wasteful. You are taking a perfectly healthy, unblemished, unworked animal, which represented massive wealth in a nomadic agrarian society.
Oh, absolutely. It was huge wealth.
And you aren't eating it. You aren't offering it on the altar in the traditional sense where a portion might go to the priest. You're just burning the whole thing down to ash out in the dirt. Why destroy such a valuable asset just to get a pile of ashes?
It definitely looks like a destruction of capital to our modern eyes, I'll give you that.
Hmm.
But the Holman notes clarify that this was actually a highly efficient ancient economy of scale.
Really? Efficient how?
Think about it. If every single time someone in the camp encountered severe impurity, they had to go and sacrifice a brand new animal to be cleansed, the logistics would be impossible.
But wouldn't preserving a living, breeding cow still be infinitely more valuable than a pile of ash? It feels like you're wiping out your future herds.
Well, you have to factor in the mortality rate of an entire nation wandering in a harsh wilderness. You have hundreds of thousands, potentially over 1 million people living in close quarters.
Oh, I see where you're going.
Right. People are dying of old age, disease, and in conflicts every single day. If an individual had to bring a fresh animal for every instance of severe impurity, they would decimate their herds in a matter of weeks. The livestock simply couldn't sustain that level of daily sacrifice.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
By burning one entire heifer and preserving the ashes, they created a massive, non-perishable stockpile. One fully burned cow produced enough concentrated ash to last for a very long time, potentially even for generations.
Generations from one cow.
Yeah. A tiny pinch of this ash mixed with water was all that was needed for an individual purification. So, paradoxically, this extreme total destruction of one valuable animal preserved the wider herd by preventing the need for constant, repetitive sacrifices.
That reframes it completely. You're making a massive batch of the spiritual soap to keep in reserve because the demand for it is going to be relentlessly high.
Exactly.
But that brings us right back to the great paradox we started with. Making this highly efficient soap introduces a massive logical contradiction.
The rules governing the aftermath of this fire are completely mind-bending. The process of creating purity fundamentally disrupts the purity of the creators.
Right, just looking at the sequence of events. After this fire burns down, the priest who officiated the whole thing becomes ceremonially unclean until the evening. He has to wash his clothes and bathe in water.
Yep.
And then the man who physically tended the fire and burned the heifer, he also becomes unclean until evening. And then a totally clean man comes to gather up these precious ashes to store them in a pure place outside the camp.
Wait, so even the guy who was just sweeping up the ashes afterward, he becomes contaminated too?
He becomes unclean until the evening as well, and it doesn't stop there.
It gets worse. Oh yeah. Later on, when someone actually needs to use the ashes, whoever mixes the water, whoever sprinkles the water of purification, and whoever even accidentally touches the water, they all become unclean until the evening.
So the very substance that cures the community creates a stain on everyone who handles it.
Right.
It's like using a bright yellow sponge to wipe down a kitchen counter covered in thick grease.
That's a good way to look at it.
The counter gets beautifully clean, but now you're holding a filthy sponge. The mess didn't just vanish into thin air, you know? It transferred from the surface to the tool.
Building on that sponge idea, the impurity in the biblical worldview operates exactly like that heavy grease. It is a tangible, almost physical reality.
So it's not just a bad vibe.
No, not at all. The Holman notes highlight this paradoxical transfer of impurity as fundamental to how the ancients understood the mechanics of a sin offering. Because the ashes serve as an offering for sin, their function is to absorb the impurity of the person being cleansed.
So they're literally soaking it up.
Exactly. The agents of cleansing inherently take on the stain, the weight of what they are trying to eradicate. The impurity must be managed, contained, and safely neutralized through this transfer.
Wow.
The people making the ash water are taking on a small, manageable measure of impurity just until evening, so that the deeper, more profound impurity of their fellow community members can be wiped away entirely.
If this ash water is essentially a heavy-duty spiritual bleach, and it's potent enough to contaminate priests just by mixing it, What kind of stain requires something this strong?
That's the real question.
And that shifts us to what the text outlines as the highest possible degree of ancient impurity, which is death.
Yeah, this water isn't for everyday mistakes or, minor ritual missteps, like touching an unclean insect.
Right.
This is the ultimate remedy, reserved exclusively for contact with the ultimate disruption of camp life.
And the rules laid out in Numbers 19 are uncompromising. Touching a human corpse makes a person unclean for 7 full days. But we should probably define what being unclean practically meant for an ancient Israelite, because it's not just a feeling of spiritual guilt. It had massive social consequences.
It was a deeply isolating reality. Being ceremonially unclean meant you were restricted from participating in the communal and religious life of the camp.
You're just cut off from everyone.
You could not approach the tabernacle. You could not participate in the festivals or the communal meals that defined their society. In many cases, it affected who you could touch, where you could sit, and how you interacted with your own family. It was a forced withdrawal from the heartbeat of the community.
And the impurity caused by death doesn't just stop at physical touch. It spreads almost like a shadow over a physical space. The text says that if someone dies inside a tent, everyone who enters that tent and every single thing inside that tent is instantly unclean for 7 days.
The text gives us incredibly granular details here. It specifically notes that even an open vessel, like a clay jar or a pot, that doesn't have a lid tightly fastened on it, becomes unclean.
Just from being in the room?
Just from being in the room. The shadow of death in the room falls into the open jars. It's a total contamination of the living space, rendering the food, the tools, and the inhabitants unfit for sacred use.
And it's not just indoors either. Out in an open field, the rules are just as severe. Touching a person killed by a sword in battle, or someone who died naturally out in the open, or just touching an old human bone lying on the ground.
Right. Or even accidentally brushing against a grave.
Yeah, all of it results in a 7-day impurity.
The NAA notes provide some crucial theological grounding for why the reaction to death is so severe. You have to view this through the profound dichotomy of the ancient Israelite worldview.
Okay.
On one pole, you have holiness, God, and life. They are inextricably linked. God is the author and sustainer of life. On the exact opposite pole, you have impurity, sin, and death.
So they are total opposites.
Death is the ultimate anti-God reality. Corpses cause the most severe level of impurity imaginable because they are the physical manifestation of the curse of sin. They represent the utter absence of the life-giving presence of God. So naturally, that profound impurity casts a wide shadow, affecting everyone and everything that comes into its radius.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. The stakes for ignoring this are monumental. If an unclean person fails to go through the purification process with the ash water, which they are mandated to do on the 3rd day and the 7th day of their isolation, they don't just stay quietly unclean in their own corner of the camp.
No, they don't. The text explicitly says that by remaining unpurified, they defile the Lord's tabernacle.
So their individual unaddressed impurity threatens the sanctity of the space where God dwells among the entire nation.
Yes.
And the penalty for allowing that to happen is absolute. The individual is to be cut off from the community. The Hebrew word used there is karath, and the study note suggests this isn't just about being politely asked to leave or, facing a temporary excommunication.
No, it's far more permanent.
It carries a heavy implication of death. God will cut them off from the land of the living.
Because if the ultimate impurity, death, is allowed to fester in the camp and encroach upon the tabernacle, God's holy presence cannot remain in their midst. The stakes couldn't be higher. It was quite literally a matter of national survival.
But if the stakes are purify yourself or be cut off from God's presence, the logistics of this become a nightmare. How do you actually get this ash water to thousands of wandering people without entirely bottlenecking the priesthood? I mean, they are not living in pristine laboratories. They're living a very harsh, chaotic reality.
Well, the logistics of administering the cure are remarkably practical. They take some of those precious stored ashes, put them in a vessel, and they must add running water.
Running water, specifically.
Yeah, the text literally calls it living water. Water flowing from a stream or a spring, not stagnant water sitting in a cistern. Once again, the profound symbolism of life is being injected directly into the cure for death.
So a clean person then takes a sprig of hyssop, dips it into this living water mixed with the ashes, and physically sprinkles it over the contaminated tent, the vessels, and the unclean persons.
And the notes actually highlight a really vital detail here.
What's that?
The person doing the sprinkling does not have to be a priest. It can be any clean member of the community.
Oh, that makes a huge difference.
They do this on the third day of the uncleanness and again on the seventh day. Finally, on the seventh day, the unclean person washes their clothes, bathes in water, and when the evening comes, they are fully restored to the community.
That decentralizes the whole process.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains why the ability for a non-priest to perform this sprinkling is so essential. The Holman Bible includes a fantastic map in its notes, charting the journey of the Israelites from Kadesh Barnea up to the plains of Moab.
Okay.
It traces their path, passing through the territories of Edom, Moab, and Ammon. It details their military campaigns, like the brutal battles against King Sihon and King Og.
So they are an entire nation navigating a hostile wilderness.
They are fighting massive, bloody battles. Elderly people in the camp are dying naturally of old age. Accidents are happening. There's constant, unavoidable exposure to death every single day for decades.
Yeah, if only a handful of ordained priests were allowed to administer this water.
The system would have collapsed immediately under the sheer volume of need, and the camp would have been overrun by impurity. This highly transportable ash, combined with the fact that any clean neighbor could administer it to another neighbor, made this ritual an incredibly resilient system.
It's basically a public health protocol.
It was a decentralized, highly effective public health and spiritual hygiene protocol that allowed them to maintain God's presence in their camp, despite the constant, inescapable reality of death around them.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We aren't nomadic tribes wandering through the plains of Moab. We don't have a tabernacle in the center of our cities, and we certainly don't keep clay jars of red heifer ashes in our medicine cabinets. Right. Why did both of these study Bibles dedicate so much ink and space to unpacking the mechanics of this specific chapter?
Because understanding the weight of this ritual sets up one of the most beautiful theological resolutions in the entire New Testament. Both the Holman and NAA Bibles explicitly connect this ancient, dusty ritual in Numbers to the book of Hebrews, specifically chapter 9, verses 11 through 14.
What does Hebrews say about it?
The writer of Hebrews looks back at this exact practice, the ashes of a heifer sprinkling those who are unclean.
And the writer acknowledges that the ritual worked, right?
The writer acknowledges that the ashes of the red heifer absolutely worked, but they only purified the flesh. They provided temporary, external, ceremonial cleanliness so a person could remain physically present in the earthly camp.
A surface level clean.
Exactly. But, the writer argues, if the ashes of a burned cow mixed with spring water could accomplish that much externally, how much more will the blood of Christ purify our internal conscience? The theological argument being made is that Christ's sacrifice does perfectly, permanently, and internally what the red heifer could only do temporarily and externally. Because of that once-and-for-all purification, these elaborate, terrifying, and demanding rituals of separation are no longer required for individuals to approach God.
It is a massive paradigm shift. Exploring this text isn't just about dissecting some weird, obscure ancient history, you know? It's a profound look at how seriously the ancients took the concepts of life, death, and the absolute sanctity of their community space.
They understood that death was not just a biological event.
Right. It was a spiritual rupture that demanded a radical communal response to put things right again.
This raises an important question for our modern context, too. In our world today, we go to great lengths to sanitize death. We hide it away in sterile hospitals and beautifully manicured funeral homes.
We really do.
We often treat it as an unfortunate interruption to our schedules, something to be managed quietly and quickly so we can get back to, normal.
We definitely strive to keep the shadow of it out of our tents, so to speak.
But how might our perspective change if we, like the ancients, viewed life and death as potent, tangible realities? What if we understood that grief and the encounter with death are heavy things that leave a lasting mark on a community?
A mark that requires active, deliberate, communal responses to heal from.
Exactly. We might not need the ashes of a red heifer anymore, but the ancient wisdom that death leaves a weight on a community, a weight that requires intentional cleansing, time, and care from our neighbors, is something we've perhaps lost in our modern sanitization.
That is a deeply compelling thought to leave you with. When we treat the brokenness of the world as something abstract, we try to fix it with abstract thoughts. But when you realize that the counter is actually covered in heavy grease, you realize you need a sponge. You have to be willing to take on a bit of the mess to wipe it clean. We hope this deep dive has given you a richer understanding of this incredible text and maybe a new lens through which to view the balance of life and death in our own world. Thank you for joining us on this journey. May God bless you and all our listeners. Until next time.